Have you ever expected one thing and gotten something completely different? That's my story with Paris. Don't get me wrong, it's beautiful, it's captivating, but it's also a box full of ton of unexpected revelations, and maybe not for reasons that you might think. If you're new here, hi, I'm Tiana, and 4 years ago, I embarked on a journey, packed up my stuff, and moved across the world to call Paris my home. I came to Paris with cliche visions of romance and beauty, inspired by films and novels, but like turning the pages of a book where each chapter reveals a twist, Paris has definitely had its own narrative for me. Looking back, I definitely wish someone would have handed me a guide, not to the best Instagram spots in Paris or the best places to eat around the city, but to its soul, to its quirks, to its unwritten rules. Because while Paris does, of course, have its postcard perfect moments, it also has a raw, unfiltered side. If you're ready to really dive into the Paris that they don't show you in movies, then stick around while I spill the tea on what it's really like to live in Paris and the 12 things that I wish I knew before I moved here. So back home in the States, when it came to getting dressed, I would say that comfort was my #1 priority. Of course, there are times where I like to get dressed up if I was going out to dinner with friends or the special occasion, but on a day-to-day basis, just for running errands and stuff, I found myself wearing yoga pants, leggings, simple t-shirts, maybe a hoodie if it was a little chilly out. Very basic. These outfits were practical, they required minimal effort, and they just felt like me. The thought of dressing up just to go pick up my breakfast or run errands, go to the pharmacy, head to the bank, just seemed a bit excessive to me. But in Paris, it's a whole nother story. Parisian style isn't loud, but it speaks volumes. Minimalist outfits, neutral tones, simple yet statement-making accessories, and a notable absence of any heavy makeup or elaborate hairstyles. Everyone here always seems so meticulously curated without looking like they're trying too hard or being overdone. It's a kind of elegance that's casual in its own way, but very distinctively Parisian. Essentially, dressing in Paris is a lot less about flashy labels or designer names, and more about a sense of personal style with a hint of sophistication and a respect for the occasion, even if it's just a morning coffee run. Over time since living here, my style has definitely evolved. Now I find myself choosing pieces that are more minimal, but still sophisticated, casual, but elegant, that blend my comfort-first approach to outfits with the Parisian elegance that we know and love today. Paris has definitely made me adapt my style and helped me learn that style isn't just a reflection of you and your personality, but also your surroundings as well. Speaking of elegance and personal style, there is one brand that has seamlessly melded with my evolved aesthetic, Ana Luisa. Now, if you guys have seen other videos on my channel or have been following me for a while, you know that I have mentioned them before. But if you haven't heard of them, let me share with you a little bit about this jewelry brand that's been my go-to for elevating any outfit. Ana Luisa prides themselves on creating jewelry that celebrates the beauty of everyday life. But what initially attracted me to them was their commitment to sustainability. In a world that's increasingly aware of environmental implications, Ana Luisa stands out and ensures that every piece is crafted with the environment in mind. They use recycled materials whenever possible, which limits waste and ensures that each creation isn't just beautiful, but is also kind to the earth. And the brand doesn't just stop at sustainability, they intertwine it with impeccable craftsmanship. Each piece feels very unique, like it's been handcrafted just for you. There's a timelessness to their collection, and their pieces are an elegant blend of both classic and contemporary styles. It's obvious that their designs aren't just about following trends, but actually creating pieces that will last you from season to season. Speaking from personal experience, I have acquired tons of Ana Luisa pieces over the years, and they have truly become staples in my jewelry collection. I have this delicate necklace that I wear quite literally every day. I've worn it on coffee dates, I've worn it to work, dinners, even meetings. It's very versatile, yet very elegant and dainty, and quite honestly feels like a piece of art. The quality is amazing, and despite me wearing it literally every day, it hasn't tarnished or lost its shine. Another thing I love about Ana Luisa is that their pieces are accessible. Unlike a lot of luxury jewelry brands where you feel like you're kind of paying more for the name than the actual product itself, with Ana Luisa you're genuinely investing in good quality, sustainable products without burning a hole in your pocket. In Paris, where the lines between everyday casual and special occasion often blur, having jewelry like Ana Luisa makes all the difference. So if you're looking for jewelry that is both sustainable and elegant, definitely check out Ana Luisa and shop the link in my bio. I remember when I first got to Paris and I was diving into my Duolingo lessons and avidly listening to French podcasts, feeling a growing confidence in my language skills. I imagined myself being able to converse fluidly with Parisians, and I believed that I actually was starting to get a grasp of the language. I figured that Parisians would at least appreciate my efforts to speak French, right? Well, it turns out that speaking French actually wasn't the end game, it was just the beginning. Because when I actually began mingling with classmates and speaking with coworkers, I realized the huge difference between the French we learn in school and the actual French that you hear on a daily basis. The language that I heard on the streets of Paris was not at all what Duolingo had prepared me for. It's sprinkled with tons of idioms and expressions and a million different slang words used to say the same exact thing. Then there are the cultural references that are embedded in everyday conversations. Names of artists, authors, poets, historians, or even historical events that all the locals seem to understand except me. I quickly learned that the French language was intertwined with the rich French history, art, and societal norms. And beyond the words and expressions are the unwritten social rules. For instance, never ever start a conversation without a polite greeting first. And then there is the art of la bise. So while many cultures have a one cheek kiss greeting, in Paris, it's two. One kiss on each cheek. But even that is not as straightforward as it sounds. Because even though la bise is customary, it's never done in formal settings, and it's usually only done amongst friends and family. But it also isn't done for super casual encounters either. And the number of kisses that you give on each cheek can vary depending on the region in France. So through these experiences, I've realized that mastering French isn't just about memorizing vocabulary words and perfecting your grammar. It actually entails immersing yourself into the culture, embracing its quirks, learning all the crazy idioms and millions of French expressions. Literally, they have millions. And only then will you truly know French. Imagine trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded while hopping on one foot and singing the French national anthem backwards. That might be slightly easier than finding an apartment in Paris. This beautiful city with its romantic allure and historical charm draw thousands of people just like me every year looking for their own little nook. But what awaits is a boatload of challenges. First, there's just the sheer competition. For every quaint little balcony overlooking a historic Parisian street, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of people vying for it. Then comes the age-old game of supply and demand. Paris, in all its glory, has very limited space and even more people looking for a piece of that space. This means apartments get snatched up fast. And if you miraculously do find a place that you like, brace yourself for tons of paperwork. Proof of income, bank statements, tax returns, and most of the time even a French guarantor. It's like the city wants a detailed biography of the last 5 generations of your family before you can rent. Paris is also notorious for rental scams, like fake listings and overpriced deposits. Every corner seems to have a scammer waiting to take advantage of you. This makes the hunt for an apartment even more daunting, and the search for the perfect place in Paris can often take weeks or sometimes even months. But if you're wondering how to navigate your apartment search without falling into a trap, definitely check out my video on how to actually rent an apartment in Paris without getting scammed. Trust me, you'll need it. When I thought of what my life in Paris would be like, the dream was simple. A spacious 1 or maybe 2-bedroom apartment with big windows letting in the Parisian sunlight, a large kitchen to experiment with French recipes, and a balcony to sip my morning café au lait. But in reality, let's just say Paris had other plans. The numbers were a shocker for me when I first moved here. Some Parisian apartments can be as tiny as 9 meters squared, which is roughly 97 square feet. Imagine living, eating, sleeping, and well, existing in a space that feels just a tiny bit larger than a generous walk-in closet. Oh, and if you thought, I'll just splurge and get something bigger, be prepared to shell out an exorbitant amount. A decent-sized 1-bedroom apartment here in Paris that would be comparable to a US-sized apartment will cost you at least 1,600 euros per month, which is 56% of the average monthly salary here in Paris. The grand visions I had of my American apartment with its sprawling living room and modern kitchen were quickly replaced by the Parisian standard. Tiny studios. Here, every square inch is prime real estate. Kitchens morphed into corners, and living spaces doubled as bedrooms. Most people in Paris live in tiny apartments, and if not, then they've opted for shared living with 2 or sometimes 3 or even 4 other roommates, all trying to carve out their own little space in this bustling city. I've definitely had to recalibrate my expectations when it comes to my idea of a living space and embrace the charm of compact living. After all, in Paris, it's not about the size of your apartment, but the life that you live outside of it. At least that's what I tell myself. Don't get me wrong, Paris is beautiful and the charm is undeniable. But before moving here, I had only been exposed to the manicured streets that we see on TV. The reality, however, is just a tad bit different. Take a walk around some parts of Paris and the ground looks like a mosaic of cigarette butts, plastic pieces, and a lot of dog poop. Rats have become the unofficial mascot of busy areas like Châtelet, and they can often be seen scurrying around, not a care in the world, completely unbothered by the hustle and bustle of the city around them. This was definitely a far cry from the beautiful Parisian scenes I've seen in the movies. But perhaps the peak of this dirty surprise came to me last year when Parisian garbage men decided to strike. For weeks, the streets were lined with not just architecture and trees, but piles and piles of trash. Paris, like any big city, has its moments of contrast, where idealized romance meets the harsh reality of urban life. When I think of French cuisine, I think of baguettes, pastries, cheeses, wines. But here's the mystery. Despite this seemingly indulgent diet, Parisians are, for lack of a better term, super skinny. And I mean everyone. I don't know if it's just the overall better quality of food and ingredients here in general, or just the sheer amount of walking that you have to do on a daily basis in Paris, but it's almost as if Parisians have their own weight management secret. Now, I've never considered myself to be overweight in the US, and I still don't now if I'm being honest, but in Paris, there are moments where anything bigger than a size 2 feels out of place. And I found myself feeling self-conscious in random moments of walking into clothing stores or just sitting at a cafe and people watching. Now, on to the smoking. It's everywhere and it seems like everyone does it. It's as though lighting up a cigarette is a Parisian's version of taking a breath. Historically, smoking has deep roots in French culture. It's almost a rite of passage, a symbol of rebellion, of contemplation, or even sophistication. Coming from years in sitting through dare classes in middle school, being drilled about the evils of nicotine, the casual attitude that they have here towards smoking was a bit startling. And I'll admit, in a moment of wanting to fit in during my first year in Paris, I tried my first and last cigarette. It wasn't for me and I haven't done it since, but it was a rite of passage and a tiny insight into the mystery that is this love story between Paris and smoking. There's a sort of unspoken rhythm to Paris. It's a beat that pulses through cobblestone streets and wide boulevards, and the pace is breakneck. From the moment you step outside in Paris, you can feel the energy. Everyone seems to be on a mission, moving like clockwork, and heaven forbid you break that flow. In the beginning, it was kind of overwhelming, and each outing felt like a mental obstacle course. I was juggling so much. I need to walk quickly while navigating the winding streets, but also projecting an air of confidence. I was worried about looking lost or walking too slow. I didn't want to get the attention of pickpockets or people trying to scam tourists. I had to constantly look like I knew where I was going, even when I didn't. This constant vigilance of always feeling like I had to look over my shoulder and always having to keep up was draining. Paris was supposed to be about romance and leisure, and here I was, power walking like my life depended on it. Over time, though, this became a reflex. Now, even on days when my calendar is empty and there's no urgency, I still find myself rushing. I often have to stop and take a deep breath and remind myself to slow down and just appreciate the beauty around me. As if to compensate for the daily rush, Paris slows down at mealtime. Meals here are a ritual. It's like an art, a celebration of life and connections. In the midst of the city's hustle and bustle, meals feel like tranquil little islands where time is stretched. Restaurants here aren't about quick turnovers. You aren't hurried along with your meal or urged to finish your food so that the next customers can be seated. Instead, you're invited to linger, to savor, to enjoy. From appetizers to desserts, every course is a journey. Initially, this shift in pace was a bit jarring for me, Back home, meals are often quick and functional. Quick bites between tasks, hitting up the drive-thru after work and eating in the car on your way home, and a kind of turn and burn mentality when you go out to eat at restaurants. But here, meals are a social event. During my first year as an au pair here in Paris, meals genuinely became the highlight of my day. It wasn't just the fact that I got to eat delicious homemade French cuisine, but honestly the warmth of the family gathering and us all eating together. We'd sit around the table, exchange stories, share laughs, and discuss our days. The kids would animatedly recount their adventures, the parents would chime in, and together we just create great memories. This French tradition of long meals, cherishing the moment, has truly become something that I really adore. In these little daily gatherings, I found a slice of Paris that truly has become to feel like home. Paris in August is a ghost town. It feels like someone took an eraser to a bustling canvas, leaving behind just a quiet sketch. The city's normally buzzing atmosphere becomes noticeably quieter. Many of the locals take their leave, either heading to their rural vacation homes or coastal getaways in the south of France. There's a certain stillness in the air here, and the shift is most obvious with local businesses. Most of my favorite spots would put up their signs that indicated that they would be closed for the month, and I'd find myself walking down streets that were previously filled with people beaming with life, only to find now that all the shutters on my favorite boulangeries, cafes, and even clothing stores were closed. While this initially felt a little bit weird, it has honestly grown on me so much. With the city less crowded in August, it really gives you a chance to appreciate Paris in a different light. There was so much more room to stroll, to sit by the Seine, and to even notice architectural details without all of the usual distractions. A city that is usually so assertive in its energy now yielded space. Space to wander unhurried, to admire the Seine without jostling shoulders, and to really soak in the beauty of the Haussmannian architecture. And today, the poetic solitude that is Paris in August is something I look forward to every year. Leaving behind the always sunny California for Paris was, meteorologically speaking, a rude awakening. I traded in my golden sunsets for a color palette that was predominantly gray. Winter brought shorter days with sunlight that only made an appearance for a few hours. The temperatures frequently hovered around the upper 30s. This kind of continuous overcast weather was definitely a contrast from what I was used to. In fact, this city experiences way more rain than most people would expect, even more than cities like London, for example. But even with the cold and the rain, there is a certain charm to the city. Rainy days definitely make the cafes more inviting, and the gray backdrop of the sky make the city's colors stand out more, like the bright storefronts or the greens in the park. It has taken some adjusting, but I am slowly beginning to appreciate the different moods of Paris, regardless of the weather. One of the first tasks that I had for myself upon getting to France was setting up a French bank account, and I quickly found out that this was just the introduction to the nightmare that is French bureaucracy. Opening a bank account was the first thing. For example, for Americans, it's extremely difficult to open a bank account here. There's an added layer of complexity due to international tax reporting laws, and a lot of banks here just flat out deny accounts to Americans because they don't want to have to deal with filing the paperwork or following the reporting processes that are required. It often felt like anytime I needed something in France, for every form that I submitted, there were 2 or 3 other forms waiting for me to be filled out. And the process of renewing visas is a whole different chapter. Appointments have to be set well in advance, sometimes even months earlier. Then there's the back and forth with the administrative offices. Communication, most of the time, turned into a waiting game. Many times, my questions would be met with responses like, "Je sais pas," or the frustratingly final, "C'est pas possible." While I understand that every country has its own way of doing things, the intricate steps of the French system is definitely something that has taken some getting used to, and quite honestly something that I still constantly find myself being frustrated with. In my early days in Paris, something that I looked forward to the most was the day that I would be fluent enough in French to finally become friends with the locals. But I quickly realized that this might not be as easy as it sounded. Most French people have very tight-knit social groups. They often establish these friendships since their school days, and they just continue staying friends throughout their adult lives. So these circles have been established for decades and they're really hard to penetrate, especially in Paris. A notable cultural aspect that I have noticed here is that French people typically aren't as open to forming friendships with new people, and especially foreigners. They also tend to see Americans as superficial and see us as being fake or overly nice. Not only that, but a majority of French people just aren't that comfortable with their English level, so it makes sense why they wouldn't really go out of their way to become friends with primarily English speakers. This doesn't necessarily indicate their unwillingness to make friends, but it does mean that they might be hesitant to form friendships with people who aren't fluent in French. But here's the silver lining. Paris is a global city. It's very international and it's brimming with expats from all over the world, many of whom are eager to meet people and form friendships. So while you might not have that French best friend for your initial years, you will have a diverse group of friends from a variety of different cultures. In my 4 years in France, I have definitely met a few French people who I would consider my friends, but I have way more international friends than I initially imagined I would. For more insights and tips on how to navigate friendships in this beautiful city, check out my video on how to make friends in Paris as a foreigner. There is an undeniable allure to Paris. It's often depicted in movies and tales as the epitome of romance and beauty. But the true Paris, the one I got to know, is much more layered. It's a mix of beauty and chaos, of history and modernity, of the frustratingly complex and the delightfully simple. On one hand, Paris can be grimy. Wander beyond the postcard perfect landmarks and you'll come across littered streets, a sense of urgency in its pace, and at times, places that might not be that safe. The city's hustle and bustle, the endless lines of tourists, and the nuances of daily life can often make it feel very overwhelming. There are days when the weight of isolation, especially as a foreigner trying to find my place, was palpable. But juxtapose this with its undeniable charm. The streets, though at times dirty, are lined with history, resonating with stories from centuries past. The city's architecture, its art, its music, everything exudes a rich cultural heritage that is hard to find anywhere else. Beyond the immediate sights and sounds, Paris offers profound lessons in interacting with its people, navigating its bureaucracy, and even taking a walk along the Seine. I've learned so much about the world, about different cultures, and most importantly, about myself. These past 4 years have honestly been transformative. The city, with all of its challenges and rewards, has shaped my perspective, honed my resilience, and enriched my experiences. The initially intimidating streets became familiar, and the once overwhelming crowd became a source of inspiration. Amid the orchestra of foreign languages, I found my voice. And while I started as an outsider, Paris has gently, yet firmly, claimed a place in my heart. In the grand scheme of things, the messiness of Paris is what makes it beautiful. And while I never imagined it initially, I honestly can't picture myself being anywhere else. So if you're thinking of moving to Paris, be prepared for an adventure of self-discovery, wrapped up in the charm of this iconic city. Embrace the journey, dive deep into the city's rich culture and history, and don't shy away from the challenges. Paris has profoundly changed my life in ways that I never would have imagined, and I genuinely hope it weaves the same magic into yours. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.